Local news with Airpark Canterbury. Find cheaper airport parking and we'll beat it by 10%. airparkcanterbury.co.nz.
When did you become interested in cult or cult-like behaviour? Was there a defining moment where you thought, this is actually interesting?
Yeah, it started about 12 years ago, Chris, when I met a former teenager from the Centrepoint commune up in Auckland. And she told me her story, and I'd never even heard of Bert Potter and all the going-ons there. And then a few months later, Bert Potter died. And I met Angie again, this former teenager who told me that she'd been the commune concubine at Centrepoint. I thought, what a story. And this happened in New Zealand. And I've written 4 books before. And I thought, 3 books. And I thought this could be my first one here for New Zealand. This is such a big untold story. And yeah, I jumped right into it back then. But then it didn't all quite work out as I thought. And that's the story of my book now too, what actually became too hard and too much.
I mean, even just researching some of the cults across New Zealand, if not Australasia, I mean, what goes on or what has gone on is quite horrific. It is important, though, to document that, particularly even with the likes of Gloriavale, which I still can't understand why, a community like that still exists. Are you surprised by that yourself?
Yes and no. The legitimate question is, have we learned? The legitimate question here is, have we learned nothing from Centrepoint after all these years? Because so many of these things have repeated themselves. And I think it's really sad how long it's actually taken the New Zealand public to wake up to what's really going on there, the level of human rights abuses. Where have the feminists been all these years? Just saying. Where were the picket lines outside of their concerts? People have been very voyeuristic about Gloriavale. I hope it's changing. I think the recent court cases have really put that to the front.
Do you think authorities should have moved faster? And do you believe the likes of Gloriavale should have been shut down by now? Or does, in a weird way, Gloriavale deserve to exist?
It's difficult. I definitely think charity services could have looked at them a bit earlier or acted on the reports that they have. And there's a reason why some Gloriavale survivors are now suing the government or some government agencies. So clearly there must have been some level of neglect. But on the other hand, just shutting a place down, you've got to have hundreds of refugees that are strangers to the rest of the country as we know it. So there's got to be some really proper transitioning for them. And because to have people who are basically displaced and then feel completely lost or maybe even mocked and shamed outside is not going to help either. But Gloriavale needs to be shut down. It just needs to be done in the right way.
In your view, what are the defining characteristics that make up a group where you feel personally comfortable calling it a cult?
I know it's a tricky word and a lot of people have reactions to it, but there's always an authoritarian leader, normally male, but not always, often a malignant narcissistic leader. There's a high level of control. There's an us versus them thinking. We have the truth. We have the right way. We have the right program. It doesn't always have to be a faith or religion. It could be a life coaching program, something that's transformative. There's this big promise of we're going to change the world or we can change you. And then gradually there's an alienation from friends and family. You live in this echo chamber, in this bubble, maybe even you move on a compound and into a community and you lose a part of yourself, especially who you used to be. And at first that could feel really great. You're handing yourself over. Maybe it feels great not to be so in control of yourself and having to make all these decisions, but there is a price that people pay for this. And I'm especially focused actually on the kids that grow up in cults. They've never signed up for this, and there are thousands in New Zealand that have gone through cultic groups, and I've researched their trauma. I've met them 20 years later. I know what they're struggling with. Their risk for addiction, for suicide, for prostitution, for mental health disorders is so high, and the level of shame. And I think we really need to address that and change the narrative of what cults are like. It's not just a fascinating salacious story. These are real human rights issues we're talking about.
When you look back at some of the cults, particularly the likes of Gloriavale, I mean, there was a documentary series that was made on this community, if want of a better word. where in some respects it almost glorified, there was a sort of a freak factor that went with it, but it glorified Gloria Vale in my view. Do you share similar concerns when you look back now? I mean, this was only about, a year and a half ago now, I think TVNZ promoted this program.
No, I think it was more like 6-7 years ago. I think it was 2017, 2018. But a year ago, we had, or earlier this year, actually, we had a really fantastic TVNZ series and I think TVNZ has actually redeemed themselves with Escaping Utopia, which I highly recommend. And I totally agree with you that what we had in the past, that series that you mentioned, that was cult propaganda, taxpayer funded. It was not the real Gloria Vale, and people who had to participate in it, they spoke up afterwards and said this didn't feel right, and they actually hate watching it. And if we hadn't had that series on our airwaves, maybe things would have moved faster to help Gloria Vale leavers, and there wouldn't have just been such a sort of national joke or just this, obscurity that we like to watch like voyeurs. Yeah, I think there's a lot of damage has actually been done by that program.
You've mentioned that anyone, regardless of intelligence, can be drawn into a cult. I wondered what you meant by that, and is that simply because sometimes people are born into a cult, or do you have examples where people, in fact, are drawn into a cult that you probably thought may not have been in one in the first place, or wouldn't have been drawn to one in the first place?
Well, you're sitting basically in front of one here. I was drawn into something that a lot of people now see as a cultic group, as a cult journalist, right? So just to make that really clear, people who end up in cults, first of all, they don't join the cult. They join something that looks really good to them and makes sense. And no group advertises as a cult, yeah? Secondly, they're not weak or stupid. They are misled and manipulated, and everyone is susceptible to that. Honestly, there are no defining factors other maybe than being maybe trusting, wanting to do good in the world, being community oriented. All these are good things. They're very human things. So we have to really let go of this false picture, this false narrative of people who end up in cults and that they're weak and stupid, because it makes us actually not see maybe the culty dynamics in the group or the church or the club that we've signed up for.
There's been talk about the connection between the likes of cults and conspiracy theorists or theories. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm really glad you're bringing this up because there's such an overlap, and I'm quite passionate about this. This is why we're also addressing this in Christchurch soon at a conference. I'm a co-founder of FACT, Fight Against Conspiracy Theories, Aotearoa, and it's close to my heart. And there are a lot of similarities, especially how hard it is to get people out of culture groups or out of these disinformation echo chambers. And some of the tactics are the same that lure people in, and the tactics basically, or the communication to use to get them out again, is also very similar. And it's quite interesting that overseas in Europe, some of the official anti-cult agencies, which other countries have, but unfortunately here we don't have that yet, they're now dealing more and more since the pandemic, some of them even 50% of the time, with people or their whānau or friends who've fallen down the rabbit hole. So disinformation and cults, it's directly linked. Plus, a lot of cults spread a lot of disinformation too. And we've seen this during the pandemic, and it's still happening now with Trumpists and so on. There are certain groups out there in the world like Falun Gong or the Moonies, the Unification Church. They're really big on spouting anti-democratic disinformation. Yeah.
If anyone is or can be vulnerable to cults or conspiracy theories, then how do you ensure that, perhaps for you personally, what you believe to be a conspiracy theory is actually grounded in reality? Because I can see how possibly easy it is for any of us to go down rabbit holes. Do you have to do something that keeps you personally in check?
You mean me personally or anybody personally? Or
both?
Both. Well, I mean, a high level of media literacy hopefully helps. And I guess as a journalist, it comes in handy that I can trust the media. It doesn't mean we don't sometimes get it wrong as journalists. I also trust the medical system, even though it's not perfect. I'm married to a doctor. So these things, of course, help. So if you're less privileged in that way, that you're not so you're not so prone to just trusting those institutions. It is a lot harder. So distrust, of course, really plays into it. And also keep in mind that people who fall into these things like anti-vax beliefs, they often have very common, they're no different to us, you and me, I guess, in the sense that they want the best for their children, they want the best for their health, they want the best for their planet. And then they find some information that seems to give them the answer to where they didn't really have the answer. So it's not an easy question to answer, to be honest, because it's so complex and there are so many factors coming into that. And we've seen this in the pandemic where we've shut the borders down. We kept the virus out, at least for quite a long time and compared to other countries in a really good way. But we couldn't keep the disinformation brain virus out that has spread here just in the same way. And it's done damage too.
So for the first time, you will be having this, well, I was going to say cult conference, but it's anything but a cult conference coming to Christchurch. Give us the details, because it does sound very fascinating.
Yeah, it's called Decult. I've actually made up that word to describe.
I do like that. I do like decult. It sounds good.
Thank you. It's coming to Christchurch in October, 19th to 20th of October at Turanga, the Central Library, with, 30 speakers or more, some of them from around the world, from Australia, from New Zealand. Many of them are cult survivors. Some of them are experts. Some of them are former cult survivors who turned into experts and become psychologists and activists and advocates and so on. We're collaborating with some great groups here in New Zealand, like the Gloria Valley Support Trust or the Olive Leaf Network. And we have authors from New Zealand. We have therapists, psychologists. We're inviting doctors especially because there will be a session for health issues in cults. So it's pretty exciting, and we hope that a lot of people from the government, from social services, the police, law enforcement, judiciary, health show up and get not just their cult fix, but a good dose of cult education.
Sounds fascinating. It's nice to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you well for the Decult conference.
Thank you, Chris.